listening to the Drawing the Ideal Self podcast for February 2024. When I was thinking about what to do for this month's podcast, I thought I might invite you to have a go at something that you would be able to use in your sessions with either children and young people or adults. So I was thinking about fantasy characters and how they are helpful or unhelpful to us, and about the way that some of them really stick in our minds for many, many years, and how we come to learn things from them. So I thought that what I would do is do an experiment with myself to explore the fantasy characters that had a real big impact on me, because I've never really looked at what it was and what I gained from my connection with them. What I found was that I could quite easily come up with a number of different stories or characters or films that were important in my development and taught me something about life or myself that actually I have taken forward. The subject matter is actually quite useful to think about, because these things arise, we construe the characters we come across, and we may or may not take on some of their construing. At the very least, we will be aware of what we make of them and what we make of their construing. And some of the things will have a lasting and profound impact, and some of the things we will kind of pass by. So I'm going to take you through the process that I use to do this. And I will also try to put the instructions in a written format in case you want to have a go yourself. That might take me a bit longer to do, but I'll give it a go and I'll have it then as a download. If you would like to have a go as we're going along, you could try that. Maybe you want to listen to the whole thing first and see what you make of what I have to say, and then have a go yourself. So the first thing is to think about what time frame you want to use. So for me, I chose to use childhood, kind of up to about 14, 15. And I took 6 different things that had been an important influence. I was actually going to go for 5 or any number. I hadn't got a fixed idea. I thought 5 might probably be enough. But then another one occurred to me and I thought, how did I manage to miss that out? It was such a big thing at the time. So we're not going to use a fixed number, but it's quite handy to have a low number, because you're going to generate a lot of constructs and it will quickly become unwieldy if you have too many elements that you're going to use to construe from. So the selection of things I chose were all kind of from the 1960s and 70s, because I'm nearly 64 and that makes sense to me. You might want to have things that either are more current, or if you're working with children and young people, you might have things that are absolutely around now. It doesn't really matter. It's up to them what sense they made of the things and which characters, which stories have been very important. The thing that I would like to suggest is you keep it to fictional characters and fictional stories. I think that then is easier to explore and to have a bit of fun with as well. And you could do drawings as you're going along if you want to. I didn't do that for mine, but that would lend itself to drawing the characters and then telling the person about them. So for each story or character, there has to be something that was important about it in order for you to remember it. So what I would ask is that you think of 3 things that were important, that you learned from it or you gained from it, and you note down what they are. And then for each one of those, you get the contrast pole. So my first one was Little Red Riding Hood. And I can remember reading that in Grimm's fairy tales when I was a child, or maybe I had it read to me. I don't really know if that's an accurate memory, that I read it myself, because when I've looked at it as an adult, the language is quite difficult actually. So maybe it was read to me. But the thing that I gained from it is that Red Riding Hood was brave, she was also clever, and she was very determined. So there are my 3 constructs there. And the contrasts to those are brave rather than can't steel myself to do something or be something. Clever rather than stupid. And determined rather than gives up. And I can remember liking the story a lot, and it sort of imprinted on my brain, and I had a very visual association with it as she walked through the woods and came to the grandma's house. I guess there might have been some pictures in the book, and there are many, many, many pictures of Red Riding Hood and the wolf over the years, but it stuck with me what a challenge this child had to overcome something that was terrifying. And the fact she was trying to do something good in the first place, but there was a risk attached to it, and that in the end it came out okay. And I think that was very important to me, that she was brave, and it was against the odds that she survived, but she did. I'm putting the links into these stories in the show notes because you might want to go and have a look at them. It could be you've never read Little Red Riding Hood, so you might want to know what the plot is. The next one I picked was a story called The Wolf and the 7 Young Kids, and it was another Grimm's fairy tales. And this story was about a wolf who eats the kids, and then eventually the mum manages to rescue them. The link actually is the whole story. It's not a very long story, but it was quite frightening to me when I was a child. I found that idea that the wolf had eaten the kids, and also that the mother comes along and then she cuts the wolf open and takes the kids out of his stomach, so he must have swallowed them whole, and she swaps them for stones and then sews him up again. I thought the whole thing was really quite bizarre. The constructs I associated with this story were resourceful, and I guess that was related to the mother goat being able to find a way to trick the wolf and rescue her children. And it was resourceful rather than depends on the resources of others. And then there was something about being sly rather than open, and the wolf was definitely very sly. And I think that was one of the scary things about it. And then cruel versus kind. And certainly the wolf was very cruel, and it was frightening how cruel he was and what disregard he had for their lives. The next was another fairy tale, Snow White, but this was from the film version. And I guess I went to see it when it first came out, or not too long after, perhaps when it first came to the cinema in my town. And I can remember my big sister was the usherette, and I thought it was really exciting because she could get to watch it as many times as she wanted. Of course, she was older and she couldn't give a damn about watching the film. Anyway, so I went to see Snow White, and then I had a vinyl record of the audio of the film. So I didn't remember the story as much as I remember this audio version. I guess it was the kind of story that would have been read to me for sure, but it was the audio version that had the biggest impact. And I got that after I'd seen the film. The constructs I have associated with this are that groups are fun. I think that was based largely on the great time Snow White had with all the dwarfs. And they were fun rather than being purposeful. So they did a lot of things, but there was a big element of fun rather than they were in a group to achieve something all the time. Then another construct was about people can be deceptive. And certainly the Wicked Witch was very deceptive and clever with it. And the contrast to that was that people are honest. The other thing that really had an impact on me with this audio and the film was the intention of the Wicked Witch to cause harm. The fact that she planned it and then carried it out. And we knew as either listeners or viewers that this was going to happen. I found that really scary when I was a child. And that bit of the film where she goes to the house of the dwarfs and she knocks on the door and then Snow White is going to answer it. On the vinyl record I had, that was a point at which you had to turn it over. And I'd be pinned to my seat and have to really make myself get up and turn it over. Because it was only by turning it over that I could get past that horrible part, but I still had to get up and do it while I was still frightened. And that had a big impact on me. So there was something there about people can plan to do deliberate harm to others, as opposed to the harm that they do is spontaneous. The next one was the famous 5. And I can remember reading those and absolutely loving them. I didn't come from a house where we had loads of books, but we did used to go to the library. And I read lots and lots of famous 5 books. I guess I probably read them all. But I absolutely loved them. I love the fact that the kids were the ones solving the mysteries and everybody went on a great adventure. And they always had a nice tea as well. That was a good bit. One of the characters that I really liked in it was a girl called George, who would insist on dressing like a boy, being like a boy, acting like a boy. And remember, this is the 1960s. So, we wouldn't have those prejudices anymore, thank goodness. But I was rather a tomboy and liked playing football. I liked playing out with the boys and the girls. I didn't really mind who I played with. But I wanted to do stuff. I didn't want to sit around and just play with dolls or play mums and dads all the time. I wanted to go on adventures. So the famous 5 made absolute sense to me. And George in particular in that story was very important as a model of girls didn't have to be one way. And that was the main construct, I think, that I associate with that, was that girls can do things or be somebody as opposed to everything being about boys, because most adventure stories had boys as the heroes. And they were a group of 2 boys, 2 girls, and a dog. So that's how they made 5. But George was the one I really liked. Another construct I had connected with that was adventurous rather than staid. Staid in the sense of boring rather than staying somewhere. Boring and traditional, I think. And then the other one was the importance of teams, that together they could solve these mysteries. And although at different times somebody pushed forward or back, it was all of them working together that managed to do something. So there was a construct developing there about the importance of teams trying to achieve something. And the contrast to that would have been sort of flying solo, I think. The next one is a film from the television, and it was divided into 3 parts, apparently. I didn't remember that. I thought it went on forever. And it was a series made in Germany, but shown in the UK. And it scared the life out of me when I was a child. So this was kind of the same time as the famous 5 Love. But this was a really contrasting, scary story. So it was a fairy story called The Singing Ringing Tree. So it's a fairy story in the sense that, the characters weren't real. There was a prince and a princess, but they weren't the things that were that interesting to me in this story. There was a fish that was stuck in the ice, and that really bothered me. I don't particularly like fish, really, but it just was awful how it was stuck there and how the main character laughed in a horrible way and frightened everybody. I'm not the only person who was very scared by this, it turns out, because when I was looking at it, it was described by many people as the most frightening thing they ever saw on television as a child. And I was really scared. I'm not that easily scared, but I was scared by that character in particular. And what I learned from that is that there are other creatures and cultures that I don't know about. And the film TV programme felt very foreign to me. Felt like it wasn't part of my norm, if you like. So I was very aware of that at that point. So it was that there are other cultures as opposed to there is only this one. Another construct that came from that was that novelty can be scary versus the familiar can be very comforting. And, it was a novel program to me. And I realised that when you're watching things that you don't quite know, it was a kind of age where you'd watch it on your own or with your siblings. It wasn't one that your parents necessarily would watch with you because it was on at children's TV time. So that's a warning for you parents out there. Just think what your children are watching because you don't know if they'll find it frightening or not. This was on BBC, which is kind of old-fashioned in a way compared with some of the things now. Another one was that people can enjoy cruelty, and the baddie in this story was really horrible and loved to see the pain and suffering of others. And that was the first time I'd really seen that. And that people enjoying cruelty was opposed to no one could enjoy being cruel. I realised it was possible too. Maybe that was what was so frightening. And then the other one that I chose was actually from when I was around 14. It's a book called The L-Shaped Room by Lynn Reed Banks. And I went to an all-girls school, very traditional, slightly snooty, I think. And we found this book in the library. It was a hardback version of it. We were surprised to find it because there was actually sex in the book. And I don't know if the teachers knew that or if whoever the librarian was, there was a librarian, if they knew what was inside the book. But this was a book that got passed around by all of the girls. Everybody had read it. And when you opened the book, it opened at the right pages to see all what we thought were the very rude bits, which was great. But the story was about somebody who gets pregnant accidentally and goes from France to England and lives in a bedsit. And it's about how she copes with the fact that she's pregnant and she is living in a bedsit she isn't salubrious and she doesn't have a load of money and it's not very nice. Some of her experience isn't very nice, but some of the experience is great because other people who are in similar situations to her or worse are helpful and kind to her. And I think what I took from this was that women can do things alone. They don't have to do them in connection with men. And I was brought up in the kind of 60s, 70s. There were still those attitudes there, very strongly, I would say, that, women would be expected to be with a man rather than be doing something on their own. Nowadays, it's so much better. Now we can be with a man, a woman, on our own, or whatever we want to do. And that is a completely different life from the way I was brought up. It's a much better life, I would say, in every respect, from those points of view. The other thing was that I had a construct associated with that, which was independence is exciting, as opposed to dependence leads to what you've always done before or where you've always been before. And that was connected with the kind of idea of feeling the need to escape, like the character in the book escaped. I wanted to be able to be independent and away from home. I thought that was a really exciting idea. And then there was a construct about one of the good things in the story, which was how other people helped her. So that people are helpful as opposed to people are mean and, I guess, selfish. So there's quite a lot of constructs there. 6 things, 3 for each, so we've got 18 constructs. So then what I did was go through and say, okay, which ones are the more important ones to me? I gave myself a limit of 5 for that, and I think that worked pretty well. So the ones that were most important were resourceful, independent, working with other people in teams, something about that, bravery, and being cautious around people. There were a couple of those stories which were about people deceiving people people being nasty. So I learned, that I think it was important to be cautious at times. So then I did pyramiding for each one of those. So pyramiding is when you go for more detail about a construct. And so you basically explore each construct and its contrast pole by asking for more details about it. And you're going down, if you like, through the construct system to the more concrete constructs. Pyramiding is really useful because if you want to help people to change, you're unlikely to change their core constructs. You may be able to help them move on some of their more peripheral constructs, which are the constructs which are much more concrete. So it's important to know which things you might be able to start with. Obviously, constructs are connected to each other, and you don't know where changing one is definitely going to lead. But for people who come for help, often what they want is, to turn into someone completely different. It doesn't really work like that. It's a slower process, and over time, they may come to realizations of how things can work together for them and how they can improve things in their life by thinking around issues. A useful question for pyramiding is to think, how does that look in a day-to-day situation? What would I see being played out? So first of all, for resourceful, I think when I'm trying to be resourceful, or sometimes I am, I will find things out myself. I'd be quite independent about that, and I'd be finding stuff out, working out how things are solved. I'm coming across problems. I'm a definite YouTube looker-upper. I use that all of the time. If I have a problem, I look up everything. If I need to know how to fix something in the house, that's the first place I go now. How can you find out how to fix your sink? Go to YouTube and see what they've got to say. Amazing resource. I wish it had been around when I was a child. Anyway, finding something out is part of being resourceful rather than not exploring. So my contrast was not exploring. In each of these cases, I've given 3 constructs which further explain the first construct. So 3 constructs to explain what I mean by resourceful and how it would be seen in my everyday life. So the next one is learning rather than not trying. And that's pretty important to me. I now I don't go to school, I've found I can learn. Interesting. I've got this kind of idea that everyone should go to school when they're adults and not when they're children, because I do it a lot better now. I would have done better at school if I could go at the moment. And then the third one about being resourceful is actually using all the media that I can use to find out answers to problems or to teach myself something. So if I watch something and there's an actor in it that I think, what else have they been in? I can look that up really easily. If I hear something on the radio and think, oh, what's the story behind that? I will look it up. So yesterday I was looking up the location of the Suez Canal and which country owned it and what the history was. I'm not really interested in history that much, but I found myself looking for it. So looking things up on the internet and using all the media that I can use, as opposed to don't use a variety of sources. And I will tend to look for a variety of sources so that I can hear something and see something. I'm quite happy to watch a video, but if I can also listen to a podcast that explains something, that really helps me. Maybe that's why I'm here. The next construct was independent. And that's played out by making decisions as opposed to going with the flow or being fatalistic. And also played out by actually having financial independence, by having my own bank account. It's a bit funny to say that in this day and age, but when I was young, actually, it was very important, and people didn't necessarily have a bank account. But having a bank account as opposed to depending on others for money. And connected with the bank account is definitely work. So having an independent way of earning my own living, regardless of what anybody else chooses to do with their money. Another construct connected with being independent was doing things that I want to do, as opposed to things that other people think I should do or would be pleased by. And I am definitely aware of the struggle that construct poses for me at times, when what I want to do is not what other people would feel they would benefit or would be good for me. It is one of the advantages of being an orphan. I haven't got any parents now, but also I don't have to either pretend to my mum what's going on or tell her what's going on and have her have a completely different view. Or my dad, that is probably the only big advantage that I can particularly think of. But I was very conscious of trying to walk that fine line between pleasing people and not pleasing people. And I knew that what my mum wanted for me wasn't the same as what I wanted. The next construct was working with other people in teams or being with people in teams. And the constructs associated with that are you would see me either working in a team or working on my own. And I feel better working in a team for sure. I much prefer that, although there are times where I do work on my own quite happily. I want somewhere to go back to, perhaps, that is part of a bigger thing. So I don't feel that what I can do on my own is that big. I feel that a team can get more done, achieve more, have more impact, all that sort of thing. And I'm thinking of the Seven Dwarfs with the teamwork that they did when they had to clean the house. A great example. Enjoying groups rather than avoiding groups. That was another construct that was associated with that. And I prefer to be part of a group. There are some groups I don't want to be any part of, but I would rather have other people that I'm connected with than to be entirely alone. The other thing is that I want there to be groups. So there was a construct about that it was something about facilitating groups, making groups happen that was important. And my responsibility for being part of trying to make things happen as part of a bigger group, as opposed to not helping to facilitate anything and just watching other people do it and taking advantage. Feel like I've got to put in some effort there as part of helping out. The next construct was brave. And the things that came connected with brave were trying things when I'm unsure. So being able to be brave myself means trying something when I don't know for certain how it's going to work out. Maybe this podcast is one of those things. As opposed to being afraid to try. So I guess maybe I prefer to try and fail than not to try at all. So brave is important. Trying new things rather than just doing the same old things. So avoiding everything new would be the contrast to that. And then being optimistic rather than pessimistic was connected with that. So, I'm quite an optimist. I expect that things will work out okay or better. I don't expect that many things will work out too badly. Sometimes it doesn't work, but I have a nicer time waiting for it to happen. And then the final construct was being cautious around people. So how does that play out in everyday life? That made me think quite hard, actually. So there's something about watching and waiting and trying to work out if this person is going to be an okay person for me or not, as opposed to jumping into relationships. And I'm not thinking of any particular kind of relationships. It could be a friendship, could be an association, could be a work colleague, could in the past have been a romantic relationship, that sort of thing. Another way that caution around some people plays out is that it's important to discuss things with my children if I think their choices are going to lead to trouble, and if they do, to help them out of a bad situation. So there was something really important about that to me, and the contrast is just hoping that everybody's going to be good. I don't think they are. I wish they were, but I don't think they are. So that's a very important construct because it has at times led to some quite tricky discussions within my own family. Another construct around being cautious around some people is avoiding spending time with some people who I think are not my kind of people in some way. And that will usually be because they're bad in some way, that, I really don't like their attitudes, or I disagree with them fundamentally on some things, or I have a really bad feeling around them that I haven't yet been able to justify, but I'd be very cautious. And I had to learn how to avoid spending time with people because as a kid, you're not very wise about those kind of things, as opposed to getting into bad situations. So now you've heard all those things, you might be thinking, okay, this is what I would want to explore further. So you could take some of those constructs and ladder them. You could look in more detail. You could talk to me about, are there things here that cause you a lot of difficulty or cause you a lot of pleasure and work really well in your life? Are there things you want to change? So we've gone from using fantasy characters very quickly to my construing of myself, and then working out how that plays out in everyday life and what you would see if you were watching me, what I'd be trying to do. So I'm inviting you to have a go, and either you could do that on your own, or you could have a go in a pair with a colleague, with perhaps somebody who is from your own team, and you want to explore it together. So you're both learning a new skill. So what you're learning is to elicit constructs and then to pyramid them. And then you're learning to think about, okay, what could you do next with them? And that's usually a discussion with your client to say, it's very interesting. Let's have a think about this. And trying to work out with them rather than for them what might be the most important steps to take next. So thank you. I hope you don't mind me using myself as an example, but it really is much easier than asking other people for their consent. So I will see you again next month if you're willing to come back. Bye.